Hey folks, welcome to the Neurosurgery Journey. We're glad to have you today. Today we're going to be talking about our journey through, it's going to be part 2 of our journey through high school and college. And last episode we talked about, considerations going into medicine and specifically neurosurgery in high school. So today we're going to focus more on the college days. We're going to talk about were we even considering medicine, much less neurosurgery. What did we do to prepare for med school and neurosurgery in terms of research and extracurriculars? And how did we expose ourselves to the field? So it's going to be a good chat today. And to help talk about this, I brought on 2 guests. So first off, Nikki, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep. Hi, everybody. My name is Nikki. I am an MD PhD student at Rosalind Franklin University in the Chicago area. I'm sure we'll get more into my undergrad background in a little bit, but for now, we'll just leave it at that.
Oh, yeah, we'll leave them on a cliffhanger. So, Zach, you want to tell us who you are?
Yes, I am a second-year DO student at Kirksville College of Osteopathic Medicine up in the northern Missouri area.
Fantastic, and I'm sure we're going to get into a lot more stuff about that too. But to start, let's bring ourselves back in time. All right, we just started your first day of college. Okay, when you first stepped foot on campus, were you thinking that you wanted to be a doctor? And anybody can start off.
I wasn't really sure. I knew I was interested in science, but I wasn't really fully decided on medicine until later in my freshman year. I decided the only way I was going to know was if I tried to find out. So I actually cold called a bunch of doctors in the area. I went to UC Santa Barbara, so this is in California, and eventually found a pathologist actually that was willing to let me shadow him, which is decidedly different from neurosurgery. But that was originally where I got started because I kind of figured that pathology was a kind of a good marriage of science and medicine, and so that's kind of where I started, and then eventually fell in love with more of the surgery side of things. But that's where it started.
Yeah, I was kind of in a similar idea where I got to undergrad and I knew I wanted to do healthcare, but I originally intended to do medicine and I got kind of scared. I saw the class load and was like, oh gosh, that's a lot. So I switched tracks to maybe do exercise movement science, maybe do physical therapy. And then about halfway through my freshman year, I decided, don't be afraid, just kind of go for it because this is what you've always wanted to do. And then I decided to stick with it.
Awesome. Okay. I think I'm actually very similar with both of y'all. I think medicine sounded interesting, but I did see that class load and I was looking at it and I did get scared. But I was kind of in between medicine and engineering when I first got in there. And I was thinking I'm like both areas. I don't really have a lot of experience with what the job looks like with either one, but they kind of have a similar path either way. You got to take your biologies, you got to take your chemistries. One's more heavy math, which, that explained why I'm here right now, which path I chose. But really, I wanted to, pick a flexible route so I can decide later, once I knew more about each specialty, I can go to either one. So it sounds like, I was engineering. Zach, what major were you?
Exercise movement science.
And Nikki, what about you?
So kind of sorry.
I was actually biopsychology, so my undergrad didn't have a neuroscience major, even though that's kind of what I ended up wanting to go for. So I kind of went for the closest thing, which was biopsychology.
Okay. So it sounds like, we have a lot of diversity in terms of which paths we took. Do you think that there's if you want to go to med school, let's first say if you just want to get into med school, is there a particular major that you'd recommend, or is it really picking the one that you like the most? What considerations would you advise people to look at?
I think it's more about what you're interested in. As long as you are able to sort of take the time to take those, prerequisites, all of the pre-med classes you need. I knew plenty of people that were, art majors or communications, various other things that were also pre-med when I was an undergraduate. So I think it's really more about doing what you're interested in and what you love, so you can speak more to that in med school interviews.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's very important to just remain happy. And if you can add a little bit of classes from like philosophy or astronomy or things that you're interested in, and you'll may end up looking non-traditional and non-medical related right whenever you apply. But of course, you'll end up being more prepared. You'll be more diverse. You'll have more background stuff to talk about in your interviews, like Nikki was saying. And it just kind of brings a better perspective to life, because everyone knows medicine going into medical school, but not everybody knows stuff about other stuff that kind of makes you more of a human.
Okay, absolutely. So, Nikki, I can see very well how your undergraduate melded very perfectly to what you're doing currently now. Zach, do you find that you've used any of the skills that you learned in exercise science and applied them to med school? Like, is there a lot of crossover there?
I think the only thing I would say is just with our osteopathic manipulative medicine, that physical therapy type of side of things. That's like the only thing that I would have really used from that. And that honestly, I didn't learn that from undergrad. I only learned it here because it's kind of talking about, like how muscles move and pretty much like basic biology stuff. I would not say confidently that I used my exercise movement science knowledge like in real life right now.
Gotcha. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so for engineering, I find that there's really no crossover with just strict medicine. So like I was a chemical engineer, so I really, besides just the rigor of it, I really never feel like, oh, this has helped me a lot for my, cardiology or anything. But I find that having a unique perspective on things does give you more opportunities, both to shine on your med school interviews, but also certain skills that different backgrounds can put you in a unique position to do something that nobody else is doing. So for engineering, I know that, if there's a project for device design or technology, I can confidently say that that's an area that I have some experience in. And it just gives you, a certain flavor on how you want to approach research. And it kind of opens the doors for things you might not usually have open if you're in med school in general. So it sounds like do what you like, as long as you get your pre-med classes out of the way, and you will be fine. So we kind of talked about if you wanted to go to medicine. Was neurosurgery on anybody's radar at this point? Like, or even any time in college? Like, even on graduation, were you even thinking neurosurgery?
I definitely wasn't. I was thinking something surgical at the time. So I did an internship at a local hospital, and I was actually supposed to be rotating on the ICU one night. And this was very much a very hands-on with the patients, so less of like shadowing physicians and honestly more like working with the nurses and doing patient care tasks, which I highly recommend to anybody, because that will serve you well as a med student, particularly on rotations. But this ICU doctor said to me one night, "Hey, do you want to see something cool?" And me being, like 20 years old in college was like, of course I do. And so he actually took me downstairs to the operating rooms, and I didn't get to fully scrub in, but I did get to observe a full organ harvest because there was a patient in the ICU that was unfortunately brain dead, and her family she was an organ donor, and her parents had decided to donate her organs. And so they flew in various transplant teams from other parts of the state. And that was the first surgery I ever witnessed, which is kind of insane because it's pretty intense surgery. And that was kind of the light bulb moment for me of like, I have to do something surgical. I knew that there wasn't really anything else for me at that point.
Yeah, so this is going to sound kind of crazy, but honestly, like the top two things on my mind when I started undergrad were neurology or neurosurgery. And that was because like whenever I was a kid, I had Guillain-Barré. And so I was paralyzed for a while. And I knew that in my heart, I needed to do something that like would give back to people that went through what I went through. And you might have been wondering physical therapy. And that was a huge part, if not one of the biggest parts of my recovery, was people coming in and helping me move my body. And so I kind of just like married in the middle and kind of went with like, I might try both and see which one I like more, and ended up going with hopefully neurosurgery along the lines. But that's
Yeah.
kind of like my main passion right now, just be neuro. And I think it all stems from that childhood trauma, of course, which it's kind of hard to explore, but I think it really helped kind of mold me for who I am.
Wow. That's awesome. Like awesome motivation that you have. And that, I guess that like, cause I never had like I kind of developed my love for neurosurgery throughout my college years and med school years, seeing it, but I never had that primary personal, very intimate experience with any kind of pathology like that. And I think you have a very interesting perspective, being on the patient side too. Do you find that you can empathize patients more because you've been in their shoes?
Absolutely, especially with patients along the neuro side, because I worked in the emergency room for a long time, and the doctors that I worked with always kind of gave me that like highlight that you're really good with patients, and it always comes down to just me being passionate and really understanding what very long-term hospitalization is like and what not being able to move your body is like, and those are two very interesting perspectives. And not very many people can say that they've been in the hospital for 100 days or that that they were paralyzed, let alone. So I think it really does bring a lot of perspective, and I'm really excited to get started on rotations and really showing people that I did this for the right reasons and that I'm going to make my patients better.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that so much. And then Nikki, I think if I would have saw an organ donation in undergrad, like I would have been like, I want to get started with med school now.
Yeah.
Those are very those procedures are, life-saving for so many people. You're saving multiple lives at once, basically.
Yeah, it was really incredible, really overwhelming for that stage of having no training, not having any idea what I'm looking at, but it was still just such a, I got in the car afterwards and called my parents and I was like, hey, I know what I'm doing with my life. So I've just never had quite that same moment of clarity that I did then. So I guess for me, it was also a lesson to those of us that are further along the path as med students or residents or faculty that you never know when something that you do for someone else is going to change their life. I don't even actually know that doctor's name. He didn't introduce himself. It was just a passing moment and it changed my life forever. So just kind of to encourage people to try to be that person for other people, because it does make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess to go off that topic, did you have any mentors in college that you looked up to who gave you advice on how to navigate those pre-medical waters? And maybe let's see, was there somebody who introduced you to neurosurgery during this time too?
You want to go
Sorry. Sure, I'll go first. So I had a emergency room doctor. Like I already mentioned, I worked in the ER for 4 years, and one of the doctors, his name is Dr. Lewis, literally like an angel sent from heaven. My best friend at the time lived with me in an apartment, and his uncle was that doctor. So I kind of knew him from a family side and an ER doctor side. So it was kind of less hard for us to get together. And so I would always kind of visit with my buddy at his house and kind of talk about things. And he kind of helped me navigate. He would name letter of recs. He checked over my personal statement, checked over all of my essays. And he seriously was like my med school father at the time, really got me through all of it. I did not have any interaction with neurosurgery though, besides me randomly shadowing, but nobody took me and said this is neuro, so do you want to do this kind of thing? I didn't have that experience at all. I kind of had to make that experience myself.
Yeah, I was definitely in the same boat. I had quite literally zero neurosurgery experience until med school, actually. So my mentor in college was the pathologist that I mentioned, and was kind of very much the same role for me of helping me navigate those waters of applying for med school and kind of understanding how all of that works, because I don't have any physicians in my family, really nobody even in healthcare, so there was no real exposure to that. So I, again, kind of similar to what I was saying before, also never underestimate the power of the cold call or the cold email, because I just met this person by being brave enough to be like, hey, I know I'm a 19-year-old freshman and I don't know anything about anything, but I would like to learn. You'd be surprised how far that gets you.
Gotcha. Okay. And for me, I had no neurosurgery experience. I think in college, I think the only things I knew about it were, I think I was interested a little bit in college about like biomedical engineering. I wasn't a biomedical engineer at that point at all. I did not have any neurosurgery experience other than seeing Doctor Strange when it came out. So we can count that. But in terms of medical mentors, I had a couple. So my aunt was a pediatrician. I think she was my first exposure into just, doctors in general. I also had a lot of my research mentors in engineering. They kind of directed me into people they knew who were doctors. So I was a lot through them. They introduced me into people who would let me shadow them and who would give advice later for like how to do applications. Really my best mentor in terms of like the actual applying for medical school, like getting your prereqs, getting your research together, like what prereqs are good. What is AMCAS? I'm having flashbacks. Really was, he was a 4th year medical student at the time. And he really like took me under his wing and, told me like, all these considerations that I had no idea about, especially since my major was not very populated by pre-medical students. Which I find like, I think with all mentorship, you should try to identify mentors in multiple areas of the field. You want to have very senior mentors who know the whole field as a whole, but you also want to make sure that you have people who are just in your shoes more recently, because I find that they're more understanding of how the process is now. And they could give some really much more, I think, practical advice sometimes. So I definitely would recommend identifying those people. And even like undergraduate students who are on the application cycle or, have just applied or have gotten in, I think those are going to be a really good bet too to reach out for. And then, so did anybody do like a pre-medical society in undergrad? Okay. So Zach, what was that like for you?
So it was essentially just like we'd have meetings like every other Tuesday, and it was basically just them bringing a doctor, because we had 2 level 1 trauma centers like in our city in Springfield, Missouri. I went to Missouri State University. I had never said that before. So in Springfield, Missouri, college, and we have a lot of doctors in the city. So they would bring, a pediatrician one Tuesday and an oncologist on the next Tuesday. And we would just kind of go listen to them talk, and then we would ask them. But they did host a lot of like, AMCAS workshops and trying to get us prepared for applications. And we had one person come in one day that kind of helped us get our CV in order and kind of the process of like how to appear professional application settings. And so I would say that like a PreMed Society is like a huge thing to join if you can, because a lot of that stuff I wouldn't have known about. And it's very daunting to start applying to medical school with like completely no knowledge, like open it. It's just like, you have to somehow fill in, 50,000 words. So it's very daunting, and like having those people kind of sitting down there and like almost forcing you to write, because if you're going to sit in there for 2 hours, you might as well work on your stuff while you're there. It's just kind of nice to have someone kind of like holding your hand, but not really holding your hand, but kind of helping you out.
Yeah. Yeah. And for those who don't know, AMCAS is kind of like a standardized application systems that med schools use, unless you're from Texas. They use a different system. Or DO. DO does, what is theirs called?
AA comas. It's basically just another formulation of AMCA.
It's like almost the same thing, right?
Yeah, literally the exact same process.
Yeah, so it's like this. It's standard. It's like the standardized application website where you fill in all your extracurriculars, like the amount of time you've taken to certain things, MCAT score, grades, and then you can pay the system to send your applications to particular schools. So you don't have to fill out individual applications for every program you want to apply to. So that's what that is. But I also had a pre-medical society, and I would also recommend joining it as early as possible. I think even if you're on the fence with med school, it's never going to hurt to at least see what's out there with medicine, because you'll be around a lot of like-minded people who know the, how hard it is to do pre-medical classes and stuff like that. So yeah, I would recommend doing it. So in terms of extracurriculars, let's break this down a little bit. So one of the main areas is going to be research. Did y'all do research in undergrad? And if you did, was it neurosurgery related?
You can start this time, Nikki.
I apologize if you can hear the rain or the thunder. We were mid thunderstorm here in Chicago. But I did do research in undergrad, but it wasn't neurosurgery related. It was neuroscience related. I worked in a computational neuroscience lab, so we kind of studied different kind of learning pathways. And I got to work on a project with a grad student and a postdoc, and presented a couple posters and did like one oral presentation. So it was a good experience. I eventually ended up in more of a wet lab setting rather than a computational setting for my PhD, but it was good to kind of have that exposure.
Yep, I also did research. I did 2 years it was autism research. It was it wasn't directly neurosurgery, but we would inject rats with different levels of serotonin and try to link hyperserotonemia to autism. And so we would have the mice kind of walk on a balance beam and see if they were able to keep themselves up or if they kind of fell off. Or we would put them in a room and see if they would try to communicate with other rats or kind of go to the other side and kind of like be afraid of rats. So we did that. I didn't get any presentations or publications out of it, but I'm like on the research because it's still going. I think that's going to go on for quite a while, but it was awesome. And I would definitely say get involved in research if you can, because it really opens your eyes to like how awesome medicine is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so my research was not neurosurgery related at all. It was like renewable energy stuff. So not even in the medicine realm. But in general research, getting involved in research in undergrad is going to increase your chances of getting into med school, which is, I would say, an important first step for neurosurgery. So if you think you might be interested in that, getting into med school is that first step. So if you can maximize your chances of that, research is going to be the way to do that. And B, neurosurgery is a very academically focused specialty. And by having that initial experience with research in undergrad, I think it's going to give you, put you a little bit ahead or even up to par to where everybody else will be. So you can at least know what you're getting into when you inevitably will have to start doing research very, very early in medical school, because that's how neurosurgery works. And let me know if y'all have different opinions on this, but I think so. Even though I didn't do any neurosurgery related research, I do think that if you can do research in the neurosciences area, I do think that will help, just because you'll have experience with the literature landscape, and you'll have those publications will carry over later to increase your chances of actually matching into neurosurgery. But I would also say do the neuroscience research only if you like it. I think it's more important to do research that you'll enjoy and get really passionate about, opposed to just doing it because you think that's what you want to do in the future. But then again, if you're watching this podcast, you probably think the brain's fascinating already, so you probably think neuroscience research is fascinating. So if you can, neuroscience would be good. If not, if your institution does not have active research going on accepting undergrads, I think any research is good. What are y'all's thoughts on that?
I agree with that. I think it's, if you find something else that you're interested in, definitely go for it, because you'll still develop those research skills that can translate into neurosurgery research later once you're in med school. And kind of like the major, what major should I be question. I think it's far more valuable to be able to talk about your research and show that you're passionate about it, that you know the ins and outs of what you did, than it is to necessarily be like, here's the perfect neurosurgery research project that I did in undergrad. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I agree as well. I don't know about how you guys, like your interview process went, but a lot of my med school interviews, we talked about research a lot. And if you didn't have that research, I feel like that could really hinder your chances to get in, like Kyle was saying. But I do think that no matter what, I feel like med school related research, like maybe pertaining to what you want to do in the future, would be more beneficial. But like, I don't think you'd get dinged necessarily for having like research on something completely unrelated to medicine, as long as it was passionate for you and you have the ability to talk about it passionately and it really shaped who you are, or it kind of helped give you that like idea of how research works.
Mm-hmm.
I think just kind of like what you were saying, like maybe like it's not as important to do neuroscience based undergrad research, but at the same time, if you like it and it can help you and you want to do neuroscience stuff, then yeah, I would jump into some neuroscience if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, don't stress yourself out too much about what research you're doing. Just make sure you have something to show for when you're in the med school admissions. And also, they're not trying to accept pre-neurosurgeons. The med school admissions committee are not trying to accept pre-neurosurgeons. They're trying to accept medical students. So first, before you get to the step where you can start considering neurosurgery, you have to prove to yourself that you can at least be a medical student. So I guess the next area of an extracurricular I think we should talk about is volunteer work. So did y'all do any volunteering in undergrad? And if so, what did you do?
So sorry, we're like kind of doing that awkward dance. So I think volunteering was one of my favorite things to do. In undergrad, I did Boys and Girls Club almost exclusively, just because you guys kind of already understand, like I have a cool, like weird pediatric background where like just kids that have been affected by things that really alter their lifestyle, like need that hand and need that support. And I think Boys and Girls Club was great because the city I'm from, Springfield, Missouri, is very impoverished and there are a lot of problems in that city, lots of drug overdoses and lots of kids with no parents. And the Boys and Girls Club was just a good way for me to give back. I don't know why I say give back. I don't know what I'm trying to give back to, but just like a thing that like it made me like really realize that these kids are in need. And if I end up being a doctor one day, like they could be my patients, and just being a good role model, that really helped. And so I did a lot of work there most of the time, but I didn't really do, besides like fraternity required stuff, like we did an 80-hour baseball game one time and broke the world record. So that was kind of cool. We raised like $14,000 for veterans.
That's over 3 days. So, that's a lot.
Yeah. We took naps in the dugouts, and the score, it was like 436 to 289 or something. It was like this huge thing, and it made like local news. So it's pretty cool. I think we're still the Guinness World Record book holder. So.
Okay. Also, that's the most neurosurgery thing I've heard yet is baseball / softball. You're in. Like you've matched if you can play softball.
Yep, that's true. I can't wait to talk about that in my interviews.
I know. I can't wait to hear you talk about that. That's fantastic. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, mine was not nearly that impressive, but I did some tutoring at the local elementary school, so also kind of working with kids. And for those who don't know, UC Santa Barbara is probably one of the biggest party schools in California, which is only relevant because the community, the like 1 square mile or where all the students live, Isla Vista, is not particularly well lit, and because of that, you can imagine the problems that come from that. So I was part of a group of students that was really pushing and advocating for better lighting and how we could make that lighting sustainable and different types of lighting, and kind of getting into something that was totally different from medicine in terms of like advocacy and sustainability, economics, all this stuff. And that was my one moment in life of being on the local news. So that was cool. But so just kind of speaking again to the point of kind of doing things that you're passionate about, because that mattered to me. It was the place where I lived, and I cared about the students and also lots of families. There was also graduate housing there, so people with families living in that community. They were often kind of forgotten or overshadowed because that was kind of where all the parties happened. So it was nice to give back to that community as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was not on the news, or made a world record book. So I'm proof that you can still make it into med school without making the news. So my volunteering, I volunteered, I did hospice, and also I worked in a infusion center for like chemotherapy. And those are two of my main, like, in terms of like hours, that's the things I did the most. And I think for me, it gave me the opportunity to see like the emotional ranges that medicine's going to put you through, and to at least understand like how you handle those, like know how you handle those situations. And knowing that you're comfortable, that you can remain at least somewhat comfortable in a clinical environment. And like, I think it's just good experience for pre-med students to see what the clinical field is like. But yeah, and I think also working with like different areas as well, like working within your community, because one of the most important things as doctors is we also have to advocate for the public health of our community that we're serving in. And so by understanding the community we work in, where it's kind of our duty to do that. So I think that's also very good opportunities to do volunteering. So yeah, and then is there like, so I know I'm getting flashbacks to applying to med school, but I remember trying to think of questions that I had. Is the amount of hours that you worked in the volunteering and research important? Is there like some kind of, is any amount of hours volunteering research good, or is it like a special number that you could remember? I know this was a couple of years ago.
I don't know that there was a particular number really for med school, but I simultaneously applied for PA school because I wasn't quite sure which one was going to be the best path for me initially. And PA school does have, most programs have a specific, it's somewhere around like 2,000 to maybe 4,000, depending on which program you're looking at. In terms of clinical experience, it's not strictly just any volunteer experience, but they want more clinical experience since those programs are shorter than med school. So, I ended up kind of doing some other things, working in a clinic at the local public health department, and then that hospital that I mentioned where I got to see the organ donation surgery, and also working as a medical assistant for a year after undergrad to kind of gather a lot of clinical hours in preparation for that, more so than applying for med school, actually. But I do think that, the more kind of clinical exposure you can get, the more competitive your application is going to be, and the more prepared you are to, it's not even so much, I don't think, the technical skills that you might learn, because a lot of times when you're doing those sort of volunteer positions in hospitals, you're not going to be learning how to like put in IVs or Foley catheters or things like that. If you're just a volunteer, but it does prepare you better to be able to talk to patients, get comfortable talking to patients, empathizing with patients. And sometimes a lot of the skills that are really, I think, underestimated when you get to be on floors, like what is most helpful to the nurses? How can you, can you get the patient ice chips or help them with their dinner, or various things that people don't think about that are actually, I think, really ways to stand out as a med student and stand out when you're doing, sub-internships and trying to match it in neurosurgery. So I feel like that starts earlier than you think it does.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. I think that last part you said about how like just putting yourself in a healthcare job, anything really, like any form of a tech, like really shows you how crucial you are in the function of the ER. Like if you can't take people to the bathroom and you can't get them that glass of water, like it's insane, like how much and like how good you'll look. I remember so many times I've shadowed like since going to medical school, and like me still having that inherent, like I'm a tech. So like I'll hear someone say, help room 18 to the bathroom. And for some reason, like I'd get up and go, even though I'm shadowing and they're trying to tell me about like the renal tubular acidosis. I'm just like, hold on one second. Room 18 has to go to the bathroom. And like, I did that like so many times subconsciously, but they love it. And they're like, wow, you're really going to like help your nurses out and stuff. Like that makes you a really good like fit for this. I think you're going to be like great. And like that kind of stuff. I think that really helps. And also getting more comfortable with patients. Because I mean, if you can help someone in the bathroom, you're pretty comfortable with them, I think. And it just kind of helps you get that like more SP encounter stuff where you're like going to have a standardized patient. It just makes you feel better and like more comfortable because you've talked about people at their worst. Whenever they're in the ER, they're angry and they don't want to be there. And it kind of humbles you in a weird way that like you need to know that you don't need to approach every patient with a super enthusiastic voice because they're in the ER, they might have a migraine and that kind of stuff. Like it just kind of really like settles you down and realize that like just come and talk to them as the patient and kind of read the room, and that the more patients you see like pre-med school, the better you'll be off. Like I think with being comfortable in the ER or in any room.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay, so I guess next thing I want to talk about a little bit, not too much, is MCAT prep. So there's hundreds of thousands of hours of information out there on the internet already about, studying for MCAT. But if you can give like, a little bit of a starting point on how people should, what resources you used, and I guess, for those who haven't quite taken it yet, I guess what it means for getting into medical school, just, to update everybody in case there's still, we have our high school students out there watching.
Okay, sorry, I'll go first. So I did UWorld. I know that that's just a huge hitter from everybody, including med school. But I like made it a priority to at least make sure I get through that whole Q bank because UWorld really prepares you. And UWorld is just, there's like several resources to use, but like I would just say like you don't have to use UWorld by any means, but pick like one or two and stick to those, because if you start throwing in 9 or 10 resources, then you're going to get overwhelmed. And doing 100 questions from 12 different Q banks versus 1,200 questions from one Q bank will be like a lot more accurate for you, because you might see the same topics multiple times and think you're confident, but that's only 2% of the exam versus like seeing a wide array of questions. And like, that's the best way to prepare, I think, because you kind of know the content for the most part. That's what undergrad's for. So if you sit there and just open up all 12 of those Kaplan books and read them all cover to cover, that is not going to help you as much as like just taking questions, because you need to throw yourself in there and you need to feel what it's like, how they're asking questions, how they're testing. Because 50% of the MCAT is just you understanding what they're asking, not content. So it's really important and crucial that you see as many questions as possible, at least in my opinion. Of course, there's tons of opinions, but
I did not know UWorld had an MCAT prep. I'm kind of shocked, right? I'm in a state of shock right now that UWorld has MCAT prep.
It sure does. Lots and lots of questions.
Yeah,
Okay.
I use Kaplan, but this is not sponsored or anything, so I'm not sure.
It can be. It can be Kaplan.
Not necessarily suggesting that people use Kaplan specifically, but I agree. Like, don't pick too many resources, and reading those books cover to cover is really not going to help you, because you need to practice the questions. So having a question bank is incredibly important. And same thing, don't necessarily like go out and buy every question bank, so you're going to get overwhelmed and not be able to get through all of that before your test date. The other thing I would say, I guess, is, my advice is a little bit outdated, because as a dual degree student, I've been here far too long. And when I took the MCAT, it was before they changed the scoring system. So I had I had a 2-digit score instead of a 3-digit score, because it changed. I don't remember what year that was, but I feel like I'm like 82 over here back in my day. But I think that, the testing advice still applies. Stick to a limited number of resources, use your question banks, and, don't psych yourself out too much. I know I definitely did that kind of with boards in medical school as well, where you have the inclination to like push the test back, but take your practice tests, and once you get up to a certain level, just trust yourself and try to get it done, and try not to do too many things at once. If you're going to be studying for the MCAT, be studying for the MCAT. I know there's this, when you're pre-med, there's this push to like, I also need to be doing research and volunteering and all this stuff while I'm studying for the MCAT, but I think it definitely behooves you to set aside specific, dedicated time to study for it and get a better score that way.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So I did Princeton review. I did the self-paced Princeton review, which I found. So I think if you have a good backgrounds in the areas that MCAT preps, like physics, biochem, chemistries. If you have a good already foundation, I don't think Prince interview is necessary. Maybe. I'm just learning that UWorld had one. If UWorld has one, that might change everything. If what I'm saying is, if you already have that good background, you're not having to do a lot of learning. You're kind of having to do with learning the questions, do more of a question bank heavy one. For me, I was coming from an engineering background, so I hadn't had a lot of the courses that was being tested on the MCAT. So I used like anatomy and stuff. A lot of that I was using on Princeton Review for the first time. But what I would say, if I had to go back, I would do way more questions. Even though didn't have a lot of those courses, I think questions are so much more valuable than doing primary learning. And I would also do Anki at the same time. If you don't know what Anki is, just search on YouTube, learn what it is, and then look up Anki MCAT prep, and then find some decks on that. Because I think if I would have used Anki and MCAT, I would have had a much better time. Yeah.
Same. I didn't know Anki existed until after undergrad. Like, people were like med school mentors. Whenever I got accepted, they were like, make sure you download Anki. And I was like, what's Anki? If I would have known that, I swear, like, life.
Yeah, we would have been dangerous. Like, we'd have been like, that MCAT wouldn't know what hit it. But so I would recommend do Anki. Absolutely. It would have boosted my score 4 points, I think. And then also, I think in terms of timing, I think the biggest mistake I see people do is that they try to say, like, I'm going to give myself 3 weeks to study for the MCAT. We'll see what score I get. If it's high enough, good. If it's not good enough, I'll do another 3 weeks. And what happens is, I find that 3 weeks, that a short period is never enough for an MCAT. Like, the more points you can get, the better. It'll serve you so well if you can maximize your score. So what I would do is find at least 250 hours to study. Give yourself that amount of time. Even if you think you'll knock it out of the park, I think if you want to maximize your score, give yourself the healthy amount of time and try to imagine yourself taking it one time. Don't act like this is your first run. Act like this is like you're taking this exam, because you'll find yourself in this, I'm going to push it back. I'll have to take it a second time. Then I only have one more time to take it. Like, respect it and give it its full effort if you can the first try. And then you have to take it, no big deal. But at least you can say that you gave it your all the first time. Okay, so another thing I want to talk about is let's see. I think there's enough. I think the topic of actually applying for med school I don't think we need to go over that too much. I think there's a lot of resources out there. But let's say once you've gotten into medical school, or once you start to get acceptances, what considerations should people be looking for if they want to have a future career in neurosurgery when choosing a medical school? Is there any considerations?
I think definitely, my school does not have its own neurosurgery residency program. However, I chose Chicago geographically because there are, I think, 8 med schools in the greater Chicago area. And a lot of them do have neurosurgery programs. And so I'm able to kind of do some work at the University of Illinois that does have a neurosurgery program and get to know some of the faculty and residents there. So I guess I would say proximity to neurosurgery could be a factor. Doesn't necessarily mean that it has to have a neurosurgery residency program, but kind of the ability to get exposure to the specialty one way or another is important. That could be geographic or at your institution.
Yeah, I also don't have a home neurosurgery program, let alone a neurology program. But I made the decision to go to this school based off of like outside reasons, kind of like my now wife, fiance at the time, was kind of like homesick of Missouri, and like I wanted to keep her in that area. And it turned out to be the best decision of my life, because I do not think I'd be where I am right now if it wasn't for the school I'm at. I'm very fortunate. But besides that point, just saying that I did get accepted to other medical schools that had neurosurgery programs, and had neurosurgery like professors. And I think I'm still happy with what I did. And I think no matter what happens, like if you're determined, you're going to make it happen. Because like Nikki was saying in the beginning, like that random email that you are afraid to send, but you do it anyways, can change your life. I mean, so many times I've just been so afraid and like, I don't have a home program, so they're probably not going to like me. So I'm just going to say like, hi, I'm a second year. I'd love to shadow you. And 9 times out of 10, you'll get a response. You might not like the response, but at least you're getting your name out there and people are seeing you. And on the times that they do say, yes, absolutely, come play or have fun, come into our OR, like that stuff will change your life. And that's happened to me. And it's because I did it. It's not because somebody else did it for me. And I think that's like one of my biggest takeaways would be to like, you're going to make yourself. So rely on yourself. You know yourself more than anyone, and applying to places that you're going to be happy at is important. If it's supposed to work out, it'll work out, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because I mean, it definitely will help you if there is active neurosurgery research at your institution and if there's places to shadow. But if you're not happy at that institution, then what's the point? You know, like you need to take the medical school location and everything holistically. And a neurosurgery program is an important variable, a very important variable. It's not the only thing. And you have to understand where you're going to be happy, what your future is, what your future goals are. And you need to pick a place, a location, and a program that's going to align with that. So for me, like I wasn't sure when I was trying to figure out what med school I was going to go to. I was maybe considering neurosurgery, but it was not what I was actually thinking more oncology when I was choosing a medical school. But I do think, I think I would have chosen similar if I was considering neurosurgery as well. Do you think it's so if you're going to a institution that does not have a home neurosurgery program, would it be helpful to see if there's like an active neurosurgical community amongst the med students? Is that a consideration you would look at?
Yeah, I would say so. And of course, I mean, I didn't just accept the school just because of like proximity. Like, I mean, I also, of course, did my research, and they did have like they had alligator neurosurgery. And so that's why another reason I went there is because like I'm doing active neurosurgery on live alligators, and that's pretty cool. And I guarantee you there aren't very many other people doing that. So I think that's something that like really drew me to that school too. But to answer your question, like I think it's important. 3 people in my class have neurosurgeons in their family. And I mean, obviously I didn't know that at the time, but like that's actually kind of come in handy too. So getting comfortable with your classmates can actually open up more avenues. There's so many doors that you just have to make the effort to open, that if you don't open, you'll never know. But like, I mean, who would have known that I had like a top neurosurgeon as a dad in my class, you know, like it's just crazy. And then it was just like a one-day conversation. I was like, hey, I want to do neurosurgery. He's like, dude, my dad is like a really good neurosurgeon.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa. So I went and shadowed him, and it was awesome. But I mean, I wouldn't have known that if I wouldn't have just talked to someone. Like, stayed at home and watched all your classes online. Like, get out there and live your life, and stuff will happen for you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. My school is, despite not having a neurosurgery program, is also just very neuro-focused. The graduate school, like PhD programs, are very neuroscience heavy, and also on the med school side, like our neuroscience coursework, neurology is very strong. So I think that also helped, despite, you know, to kind of sort of compensate for not necessarily having that neurosurgery connection. But for example, we had a seminar speaker come to talk to the neuroscience grad students, and they had a dinner afterwards, and I got to talking with her. I told her I wanted to do neurosurgery, and she said, oh, I know someone who's a woman neurosurgeon at Stanford, and you should connect with her. And it just so happened she was flying out to Chicago like a few weeks after that, and I got to have lunch with her. And this was totally just random connection. The speaker wasn't from here. The person I connected with wasn't from here, but all just kind of all works out. So to your point of, it's important to talk to people and get out there as much as you can, even with everything kind of being on Zoom. That can be both harder and easier to do. I feel like more diverse connections geographically, but yeah, don't remember to get out there in person too and socialize with people.
Yeah,
people when you can.
Yeah, and I know y'all are too humble to admit this, but even though you don't have a home neurosurgery program, I mean, Nikki, you're publishing like at a junior attending. And Zach, I keep having to ask you which year you are because you're on so many neurosurgery projects and doing them well. I have to be like, you're a what year? You're a second year? So if it, yeah, like you said, if it needs to happen, it will happen as long as you make it happen. Okay. So is there any other topics within the undergraduate realm, or even is there any topic before we go? Is there anything you think we should touch on?
I guess one thing I would say, more of like closing thoughts, is not to get too caught up in the rat race. I remember how, not that it's less competitive once you get to medical school if you're trying to get into neurosurgery, but just how competitive that pre-med environment can be, and it's really important to focus on who you are and what is important to you, and kind of run your own race. And there's a really great quote, and I don't know who said it, about comparison is the thief of joy. And I think that's really important to remember as you're going through this process, because there will be challenges, there will be obstacles that you have to overcome. And, the only way that you can do that is if you have faith in yourself and your abilities outside of, the people that are surrounding you. Everyone's on their own journey. And if it's meant to be, it'll happen.
Absolutely. I think just closing out, I would say if you were to fill your resume, pick like 3 or 4 things that you can talk very passionately about versus 100 things that you can hardly talk about. Because, I mean, sure, you might have been president of this club, but like, what did it do for you? And like, can you talk passionately about it? So not saying don't do that stuff, but I'm just saying, like, if you had to pick like a good research project or 4 executive boards that you might not be able to talk about, like, do the thing that makes you happy, of course, but also do the thing that's going to allow you to talk about it and like reproduce those great qualities that you have inside you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And I think, for me, like, I think it kind of goes with the part 1 of this video is, neurosurgery is a decision. Going into neurosurgery is a decision that you need to be pretty informed about. So if you're a freshman in college, you're a college student, enjoy college, do the things you like. And if you like, researching neurosurgery, go ahead, but don't let it consume you, and wait till med school before you start like absolutely diving headfirst into it, because, college is a time to explore your interests, figure out what you like. So yeah. And then, and also just, I think having faith in yourself and your abilities is always going to come in handy. And, everybody was a freshman in college, not knowing, where the biology building was. But as long as you believe in your capabilities, you'll be okay. So awesome. Well, thank y'all so much for going on the show. I think it was a really awesome conversation. I think we laid a nice roadmap between the first episode and now for, a beginner's guide as a prospective neurosurgery applicant on going through college and high school. So yeah, if you want to, our show happens every Thursday afternoon at 7 o'clock Eastern time. We'll see you next week. So I guess we'll see y'all then. Sounds good. All right. Bye, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.